So I guess, first of all, were you following these cases through as they advanced through the legislature? Or I guess not the legislature, excuse me, as through the judicial system?
Yes, and these are not unexpected rulings. Look, the right to marry is not a constitutional right. If the right to marry were a constitutional right, then siblings could marry one another, 15-year-olds could marry one another. Our nation has always recognized the right of states to regulate marriage for the common good.
How do you feel about this ruling today?
Well, I think it is a wrong ruling. As a Christian, I go to the Bible and I see in Genesis chapter 2 and Matthew 19 that God said marriage should be between one man and one woman in a lifetime relationship. And any deviation from that, whether it's adultery, premarital sex, unbiblical divorce, or homosexuality, is wrong.
Now, I mean, obviously you're a church leader, and I'm talking to you about a judge's ruling, but this is an issue that you've been pretty outspoken on. Why is it important to you to speak out about this issue?
Well, as a pastor and as a Christian, the Bible speaks out about it. And as an American, I also realize that no nation can survive that condones what God has condemned. And God has condemned homosexuality just like He does adultery or premarital sex as being wrong. And as a nation, we cannot be blessed by God if we're rejecting God. On a very practical level, I think it's important to know whenever you counterfeit something, you cheapen the value of the real thing. And homosexual marriage is a counterfeit of marriage. And what we've seen in other nations that have legalized same-sex marriage, they have found that the rate of heterosexual marriage has decreased precipitously. And we're seeing that now in our nation as well. If marriage is whatever you want it to be, why should you bother to get married at all? That creates all kind of social instability.
What do you think about civil unions then? There are some places, some states that offer that as an alternative.
Again, I think it's a cheap substitute for what has been the understanding of marriage in our country for 226 years. In 1885, the Supreme Court said in the case of Murphy versus Ramsey that no union could be more beneficial to society than that which comes from one man and one woman in the holy estate of matrimony. So again, I believe what is happening now are the courts are caving into political correctness, and I think it's going to have devastating effects on marriages and on children in our country. The fact is, God created the home in such a way that children need to be connected to both biological parents. And while that's not always possible, government should support the ideal rather than supporting the counterfeit marriage called homosexual marriage.
Your message to, this is most likely going to be appealed. Greg Abbott hasn't said for sure that he, or hasn't filed an appeal just yet, but your message to the next court that takes this case up?
Well, I hope again that the court will follow what has been the understanding in the judiciary of our country for 226 years, that marriage should be restricted between a man and a woman. And I believe that serves society best, not just Christians, but society as a whole.
Is there, I mean, I think this comes as a big surprise to people that a ruling like this happened in Texas, of all states. I mean, is there, I just wonder, you know, did you pick Dallas for a reason? I mean, is it the conservative ideology of the area? Does that...
And what do you mean, did I pick Dallas?
I guess what I'm saying is there's been a lot of talk about, you know, it's no surprise that in California, but in Texas, this is a surprising ruling.
Oh, I think there's a movement in every state of the Union to veer away from God's teaching in His Word. That is nothing new. I think this case, like all of these state cases, will ultimately end up in the Supreme Court. And my prediction is in the next 18 months, the Supreme Court will decide on whether these bans on same-sex marriage are constitutional or not. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court has a history of not setting public opinion, but following public opinion. So I would not be surprised at all to see the Supreme Court eventually strike down all state laws that ban same-sex marriage.
But this, I assume, would you ever allow a same-sex marriage to take place here at First Baptist?
Absolutely not. I would never perform a same-sex marriage, no matter what the government said, no matter what the results were, because it's an abomination to God. Nor would I sanction adultery or premarital sex. The Bible speaks against all of these as going against God's plan for sexuality, which is a man and a woman.
I think that was